Okay, so hi everyone. I know I see some familiar faces, but I'll still introduce myself. My name is Mandy Reed. I am the postdoctoral fellow at CAPS, and I'm here with Dr. Dornheim. She is the neuropsychologist at CAPS. When we're on campus, she's primarily on the BBC campus, and she is my supervisor. So today is the fourth session of our 8-session series, and today we're specifically looking at learning to manage yourself. So we're working primarily with planning and organizational skills. If you weren't here for the other workshops, that's totally fine. They're not necessarily interrelated. We might still, touch on topics that were talked about last time. So just for you to know before we even get started, if you have any questions, concerns, I don't mind any interruptions. You can send in questions throughout as they come up for you through the chat feature, or if you feel comfortable to unmute yourself and ask a question, you can feel free to do that too. Okay, so this is just some general information. As you know, we're not working on campus right now, but when we are, this is where we're located. Our phones are still working. So when we first went remote, we were just leaving voicemails, but now we have front desk staff that are able to answer the phone. So you can call in and still make appointments. And if they're outside of the working hours, which is 8 to 5, you can, if you need to speak with a clinician in that time, we have a 24-hour hotline that you are able to. Or if it's just to make an appointment, you can leave a voicemail as well. And we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Okay, so let's just get right into it. 1 second, these Zoom tab things are in my way. Okay, so why do we need to better manage ourselves? So if you think about it, like your ability to organize yourself is a huge part of how successful you are or how you engage with, all the different parts of your life. I think when we think of organization, you can tend to think of academics, work, but I think organization, that bleeds into everything else in our life. And also the way that we feel then impacts the way that we're able to approach or step into, our role, our different roles in our lives. So when we're not organized, what happens? We lose things a lot. You put your car keys here, you forgot where they are, you're searching for 10 minutes, you've lost 10 minutes in doing that. You've lost those 10 minutes, you're now in a rush. You get in the car and things just kind of trickle down into each other. And so organization can be a big factor in helping, help the flow of the day, but also helping with you managing stress and managing feelings of anxiety. What we know also is that when we are in a higher level of stress, so I know 2 sessions ago we talked primarily about stress and how does that impact us and how do we manage that. And if you think about the brain, like just from a biological sense, the brain functioning when we are stressed out, we're less able to maintain attention. We're less able to, what we call is the frontal lobe of our brain that manages the executive functioning. So that manages our organization, planning, decision-making, critical thinking. That's the parts of our brain that we're really activating when we're engaging with our work. And so what we know is that when we're in a high stress situation, we're activating the emotion part of our brain, the amygdala. We're like producing higher hormones in that way. And by nature, when those hormones are at high, that shuts off or inhibits the frontal lobe. And so, sometimes people say like, I really just feel like I can't. I'm so overwhelmed, I cannot do it. And to me, that makes sense. Like just from a biological sense, it's very difficult to do those things. And so the goal in what we're looking at today is how can we better manage our emotional component? It's not to say you shouldn't have emotions or feel anything. It's how do we manage it so it can optimally help with activating the part of your brain that you're trying to use in that moment. And so, organization, planning, that is a tool that we use in order to do that. So it's thinking about it in that way where sometimes people are like, yeah, but is it the chicken or the egg? Like, am I disorganized that makes me stressed, or am I stressed and it makes me disorganized? And I think that's a great question, because they both play on each other. So I think where we can start is looking in ourselves and seeing like what these strategies are. Okay, so what gets in the way of that? Let's look at some barriers that get in the way of our ability to organize or plan or manage ourselves. You know, if you think about life distractions, we all have things that we have to do. We don't necessarily want to do them, but things that have to get done and they come up. So we can plan all we want for, you know, where we need to be at what certain time. And still there are things we need to do. We need to pay bills. We need to, you know, if you have a dog, feed the dog. You need to clean your house. Like all these different things which can feel like life distractions, but are things that you have to do. Like I mentioned earlier, if you look at the pattern of being late. So organization, I think, is directly correlated with our ability to manage our time, right? So if we're perpetually late or we're always running late, you know, you're always feeling like you're trying to beat the clock, it's always down to that crunch, that also doesn't allow for much room within that for these life distractions to happen, or even if they do, you're still functioning at this really high level of stress. Functioning at that level of stress is also not good for our bodies. You know, we're more susceptible to illnesses and burnout, you know, mentally drained. Like, have you ever felt like, I literally cannot do one more thing or I might just like pass out? It's literally that sense of like, you know, constantly in that state of rushing. Losing objects, you know, so whether it's an assignment, like doing an assignment and forgetting where you put it, or something like the car keys that you really need to get to where you're going, or important files that you needed for a presentation at work, like whatever it is, losing objects, that can be something that gets in the way of our organization. We need specific things to do certain tasks, and if we can't find them, that kind of gets in the way as well. Sorry, don't know why we have two of losing objects, but it's okay. Procrastination, I hear this one a lot. I also do this one a lot. Tend to do this one a lot. So avoiding things that we don't want to do. If you think about, you know, things that are difficult or boring, or things that we just truly don't enjoy, sometimes it's harder to get to it. Sometimes it's harder to motivate ourselves to do it. And then that gets in the way. That I definitely know I've done this before, where you make a schedule, you plan, and you're like, okay, right here, I'm going to study for this exam. And then the time comes and you're like, you know what? I think I really would prefer to watch this show on Netflix. And you do that instead because in the moment it feels good. Like, it's that instant gratification. But then you're left avoiding the things that you still need to do. So even though you've kind of quote unquote been organized by planning, you've still not really stuck to it. And so that's still a barrier to your success in that sense. And then the final one here is multitasking. You know, I think our world right now really promotes that, you know, you have the computer open, you're also scrolling on your phone, checking your notifications, maybe the TV is on or you're playing music in the background. Like, there's so much stimulation, and we tend to think we're good multitaskers. Like, I have 4 tabs open in my Safari, like whatever. And we try to do, you know, I think sometimes people associate with doing more as being more efficient. And again, from a biological sense, if we look at the brain, what we know is that as human beings, we are not good multitaskers. We can maybe compensate and be able to try to navigate those things. And yeah, maybe we can accomplish that. However, if you think about it, no one task is getting your full attention or your best. It's not to say that every single task you do needs 100% of you. Some tasks are just like, again, like the things that you know you have to do, paying a bill. I don't need all cylinders running for me to pay a bill. But, you know, it depends on the task that you're doing. And so if you're trying to work on a 20-page paper while also navigating, like planning your dinner reservations on the weekend, while also listening to a podcast, like those are all things that are distracting for your 100% for any one of those. And then there's the element of needing to prioritize, like what's most important right now. And we talked about this last time, but also what if we shorten the amount of time that you're doing it, but you're fully focused in on one thing? That frees you up to be able to do other things. So we'll talk more about this as we go on, but multitasking for sure is something that can get in the way. All right, so what are the benefits of being organized? So we first look at increased productivity and improved performance. That if we are less stressed, if we are more able to have a sense of what we're trying to get at and going through like a better flow within our day, within our week, whatever it is, we're likely to be more productive. We don't have these external distractions. We don't have these things pulling us in. Well, we maybe do have different things pulling us in different directions in our life, but we have some sense of directionality, like intentionality in what we're doing. And so when we're less stressed, when we're in those places, it improves our performance. We can then put our best self forward and engage with whatever we're doing. Another sense of that is control. So, you know, have you ever felt like a time in your life where it just feels like you have no control? Things are being thrown at you. You have so many responsibilities, tasks, things that you know you have to do. And within that, there's no real like leeway for you to have any agency. And so by organizing or planning, what we do in turn is kind of give ourselves back that some sense of that control, where yes, these are things we have to get done, whether we like them or not in some situations, but how do we navigate that so we can regain some of that control and help that feel more manageable and help manage our stress and help to, you know, overall feeling in a place of having agency in your own life. And so that's really, really important when you think about, you know, our overall well-being, but also our success and our ability to kind of get through. Because who really likes to feel like you're just kind of barreling through life, that you're just, you know, going with things as they come? And yes, I understand that some people function in that way, but also within that, I think there's always room for just improving the way that we can manage ourselves. So when we are better at organization, that can help with thinking. So like I explained earlier on, you know, the parts of our brains that we want to activated when we are doing an assignment, doing an exam, working, by organizing, again, that's a tool that we can use to help manage the stress, manage the emotional component in order to then effectively activate that part of our brain. Better decision-making, problem solving. We have access to the right information and tools. So in essence, you're prepared for whatever task it is that you're coming to. And then improves your concentration and your ability to learn. And I think ultimately, you know, someone who's coming in talking about symptoms of ADHD or with a diagnosis of ADHD, that oftentimes is a big one, you know, the concentration piece. And so there are different ways that we can intervene and think about it. But the first is like shifting your perspective of like, how can I utilize different skills? Because I think people come in and they're like, you know what, I just want medication. And oftentimes what we know is that medication is effective in the sense of, yeah, while you're on the medication, I think anyone could benefit from that. However, you don't have those skills and strategies. So once you stop taking that medicine, if and when, you're left back at square one. And so these are ways to help start building that repertoire of skills. All right, so I know I'm alluding to strategies, and so now we're going to go specifically into some of them. So what strategies can we utilize to maximize organization, time management, and planning? So the first one is goal setting. And that one is paramount. It's very important in order, because, you know, have you ever started something and you're like, wait, I don't even know what I'm doing? We have to have a sense of what we're hoping to achieve, and also being more intentional in the way that we're setting those goals. So we first think about what is important to us, what motivates us, what are we trying to achieve, and that then can help you guide, you know, where it is you're starting, but also the end goal of where you want to end up. And so research shows that some people just aren't inspired by deadlines. You know, when you have that due date on your calendar, some people really, that's here nor there to them. That's not something that helps to fuel productivity or helping them engage. And so it's thinking about, for you as an individual, what is something that motivates you? I think there's a caveat. I don't think we always need motivation. I think there's also an element of self-discipline. However, yeah, it's thinking of what's meaningful to you and helping you connect with that meaning in what you're doing. I often hear people say, well, this class is really just a joke. I have to do it because it's a requirement. I don't really need this for the bigger picture of my life, of what I want to do. Totally agree. We've all been there. Have to take classes that really feel irrelevant. And that's the truth. However, I think in shifting the perspective of saying, yeah, this class feels like, you know, a joke, but this is getting me closer to my ultimate goal of graduating college, my bigger goal of going into whatever field it is you're working toward. And that seems, I feel like it seems kind of counterintuitive, because like in the moment it's like, yeah, but this just doesn't feel good. And I think a part of goal setting is helping yourself ride out waves or ride out sections of your life that aren't enjoyable. Because I think the misconception is that because you're doing something you want to do, you're doing something that feels true to you, that it's always going to be fun, it's always going to be enjoyable. And that is not true. I hate to burst the bubble, but it's not true. And so we have to set our goals and help ourselves connect with it in a way that means something to us. So if you think about what are the priorities in your life, and that again does not have to be primarily related to your academic goals, your professional goals. Those are, of course, very important, but also thinking like, what other things do you value in your life? I know for me, I really value like work-life balance, like my relationships, my family, you know, that those are things that are important to me. So if it means maybe, you know, professionally, some things have to give because those things are just as important to me. So it's looking at what are the priorities in your life and how do we manage them. So when I say set goals, it's not necessarily like set goals for your psychology class, your chemistry class, whatever, but it's also setting goals for, I still want to maintain a life and I still want to have relationships and friends and be able to do things. Goals include all of that. So it's really shifting that lens of goals really being professionally driven. Again, goals are something that require commitment to maximize the likelihood of success. So my philosophy on motivation is that motivation for sure makes things easier, and it helps us feel energized and able to step into whatever task we're doing. However, I think even still, without motivation, we're still able to do things. It might be a little harder or take that much more energy, but we're still able to do it. From a physical point, we can still sit in a chair, we can still write, our brains still work. We just feel like we don't want to do it. And sometimes those things don't connect. But again, they're things that we have to do. So how can we help with those goals though? So particularly for the ones that, you know, aren't necessarily enjoyable or fun, you want to set both long-term and short-term goals. So as human beings, yes, we can function without motivation. The goal is to have that, right? To feel motivated and to feel engaged. But how can we help ourselves get there? And so I'm not sure if you'll find someone that will say like, achieving something doesn't motivate me. I think generally as human beings, we feel motivated by success, or we feel motivated by that feeling of accomplishment. And so setting your goals in a way that you are setting yourself up for success, setting realistic, shorter term goals, achievable goals. These are things that you want to, that, you know, on a to-do list, you know, you can check them off. It's not like a massive project that's in 6 months. It's that box is still not checked. You want to break it down into smaller parts so that you feel like, you know, you're getting through things and it motivates you to come back to it. When we think of goals, we want to be, so in terms of the specificity of the goals, we kind of do want to be more specific, right? So not just saying like, I will finish all my work this week, like being more intentional and specific in what it is you're wanting to complete So in this class, I want to complete this assignment by this time. We want to really lay it out for ourselves and not leave it so open. Because I know for myself, when I have a goal that's like, you know what, I'll finish by the end of the month, I'm like, okay, well, I can do it in the last week. I'm not saying I do that, but in my mind, I know that's where it can go. And so it's really helping yourself have specific times, have ways that you know that when that task is completed. So have it be, you know, more measurable. So you know that if it's a reading assignment, you're reading this page to this page, whatever it is. So it's really helping yourself navigate in that way and be more specific and intentional in the goals that we set. Because the goals that we set really set the stage for us and really set the way that where our planning is coming into play. So I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with SMART goals. This is kind of what I was alluding to. We want our goals to be specific. We want them to be measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So specific, that's the component of it saying like, in this class I have, I'm doing this particular assignment. I'm going to get through this section and this section. So if you have an essay, I'm going to do the introduction, start some of the body, measurable. So that I kind of just combined both those things. Attainable. Let's be realistic. If it's a 20-page paper, don't give yourself one night to write it, right? Like space it out into some, and I'm not saying that's not possible. I know we've all been there as well, but is that ideal? Probably not. So, you know, like being able to plan things out where they feel manageable. We're trying to minimize our stress, not increase it. And so relevant, clearly we want it to be relevant to what we're doing, and time bound. So you want to say like, on this day, by this time, I'm done with this. And these are things that can help you be more effective in your goal setting. So these are some examples. I was kind of talking them through as we were talking, but for example, a general goal might be, I'll be a better basketball player this year. A specific goal might look like, I will get 18 baskets in 20 tries by June 1st of this year. I'll begin working on this goal by January 15th. So you're really giving yourself a timeline and the specifics. This goal is very specific, but you know, by being able to have those elements of it that help kind of that intentionality and direction of what you're working at. And then you can, I won't read through all of them, but you can read through some of these here on the screen. So I hope this is helpful in terms of, you know, I think from our kids, we hear like, oh, you should set goals, but no one really teaches you how to set goals. It's like, you know, so I think sometimes to break things down in a way that kind of, again, feel counterintuitive, but from like when I was in grad school, I learned, you know, about these different elements. And for me, that was a game changer in the way that I was thinking about something. So sometimes it just takes a shift. Okay, so let's talk about organization now. We're going to first start in just a physical sense. How do we organize our workspace? So I know we are all working from home. It's different than being able to, like, you know, leave your house, going to your office or going to your classroom, the library, whatever it is. It's very different. I think for me, it took a while to adjust to that, like doing everything in the same place. But, you know, even within the context of your house, your apartment, you know, wherever you are, noticing where is it that you feel like you're most able to get in that zone of, you know, work mode, and working under whatever conditions are ideal for you. So we're thinking, you know, the time of day that we're working. I know for me, if I'm trying to work on something at 10 p.m., it's not gonna happen. So knowing the time of the day that you feel most productive, for some people that is in the night. Also, sometimes that's by default. If you're working in the day and you're doing certain things, like you're kind of forced to work in certain times. So I can understand that as well. But finding, just in general, an optimal space that's going to be most effective for you. Preferably somewhere where you're able to sit up, maybe have a table if you have a computer and things like that. We want to differentiate the workspace and the relaxation space. So trying not to work in your bed, which we associate with sleep. Trying not to lay down and work. can easily fall asleep that way, especially if it's a boring thing that you're working on. What else? So again, I know that, working at home is not always optimal space or things like that, but making handwritten or physical lists that you may place in your line of vision. So if you know that you're working, maybe if you have a desk at home, awesome. Or if you're at the dining table or wherever it is, having post-its or notes or things or even if it's something that you just take out of your book and have in front of you while you're working, having those physical lists and schedules and things like that in your line of vision helps things to seem more organized on paper, and inherently helps us organize more internally, which we'll talk more about. And then, in essence, simply by writing a list, you feel like you've already begun to conquer it. Meaning, like, I don't know if anyone ever does this, but like sometimes I forget to put things on my list, and I've done them, but then I go back to the list and I write them down and check them off, because it just, like, to me, that's like, it feels like I've just been more productive. I don't know why, but it's that sense of like motivating yourself and helping yourself earn that sense of accomplishment, and
it simply feels so good.
It does. So I'm not sure if any of you are in grad school, but even, just generally, when you have 10 different things you're working on at the same time, having 10 different to-do lists within those things, but then also having one to-do list for a day of like, okay, these are the things I'm attaining today. And you can pull from those overall lists. I know that system works for me. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but it's finding your own system of how do we organize our lists and how do we like feel the most motivated. So this is a big one, keeping the workspace neat and having a system of how things are laid out. Being neat and functional, that's going to be a big part of it. So that when you're studying, that this book is here, that your post-its are located, that you're not on that hunt to find things, because again, we lose time, we get distracted, you're looking for the post-its, you see something you haven't seen in weeks, and you're now doing something else. So we want things to be, where we know we can find them. We want to have a system of how things are as well. So maybe having a book like closest to you that you're likely never using, that's not being optimizing the space, that you can have things laid out in a way that it's most effective of the things you use the most, or whatever specific topic area. So it's really finding your own system of how best can you navigate those things around you. When things are cluttered, tons of papers on the desk, you lose things in there. So if it's important documents, if it's, whatever it is, it's easy to think for things to get misplaced or damaged. Examples of organizational skills that are like keeping track of items as they're used. So as you use them, you're putting them back where they were and maintaining that system. Or even if it's not as you use it, like I know for me, sometimes in the moment, being in the office or even here, you're going from one thing to the next. Maybe it's at the end of the day, making sure that you get your desk back in order or get your workplace back in order. And so that, over a week, things pile up and are a much bigger mess. So finding what works for you, if it's in the moment, if it's at the end of the day, end of the week, I wouldn't really recommend end of the week, but whatever works. Color coding. So, thinking of color coding like specific subjects or specific tasks to know that, okay, when I see red, I know that this is this thing. And so I don't really have to be rummaging through. I'm looking within this block of files or whatever it is. Or even on your schedule, knowing that when you see pink, that is work time. And when you see blue, that that's your self-care or social or hangout time or whatever it is, like helping you be able to quickly notice something. So if we think from an information processing theory, which is a theory based on learning, how do we minimize the load in our brain? And so in the input of information, we want it to be able to be attention grabbing. So the colors are highlighting important parts. We're also chunking them into different categories based on color, again, minimizing our load of like having to remember or think through like the intricacies of one thing. It's helping you self-organize and categorize, and we're minimizing that load on our brain. So that's something that's really important, and it's supported by theory, supported by research, and it might seem like a small thing, but it can be a game changer. It can change the way that you're able to organize things, but also prioritize, lay things out, and manage your own thought process. We want to keep books and study materials in identifiable places, which I've mentioned previously, and then use visual reminders of due dates, deadlines, and points of identified goals. So even having our goals written out, I think, is really helpful. We don't have to hold them in our brain, but we can revisit them. We can remind ourselves, we can look back to it. It's kind of similar to I think of it kind of like an affirmation, right? Like, so even if we have affirmations about ourselves and we can come back to them, look at them, remind ourselves of these things, in some ways, it's an affirmation. Like, we can look back and say, like, I can do this. This is what I've planned to do. I know I can do it. Let me get back to it now. So, yeah, just utilizing that as a way. We don't have to keep them in our mind. And that, again, reduces our cognitive load. That reduces the things that we're keeping in what we call our working memory, right? The things that we're having in the here and now. If we're constantly having to go over that list, that takes energy. And it also takes, the energy you could be putting into sustaining attention on something, the energy that you could be using to manipulate other thoughts or think about other things. So it minimizes our flexibility when we're like trying to hold on to information that we can more easily manage by, writing that down. So seems small, but it is a big thing. So how do we organize our thoughts? I think the physical space probably is the most tangible, or I don't want to say easy because I don't know if that's easy, but yeah, the most tangible way. Our thoughts are really hard. We have thousands of thoughts a day. How do we organize those, right? The goal is, I'm not saying the goal is to not have any thoughts. The goal is to look at what is optimal for me, how best can I organize them and manage them, but also how can I, let thoughts come and go without giving them so much energy and power. So I mentioned this earlier. Each of us has a different peak time where we have the highest energy, or our attentional abilities are the best. So it's really thinking about when that is for you. When are you the most, like, your brain is just kind of primed to work. Again, writing down thoughts, ideas, and outlines for assignments and tasks. We are externalizing the thoughts into a physical sense, and being able to have that as reference instead of holding that in our mind. We want to assign specific times to think about certain topic areas. So for example, thinking about math during a block of time from say 10 to 11, and then transitioning to another topic area, it can really help like streamline into like, I'm thinking about this. It doesn't mean that other thoughts are going to come into your head. Like, you're like, oh man, I forgot I had to go to the supermarket and get this thing. It's not on my list. Yeah, quickly write that down on a piece of paper so that after you finish doing the math, you can come back to that piece of paper and add it to your list at that point. I think we can get derailed when we're doing something, we have a thought and we're like, oh God, I'm gonna forget this, I need to go do it. And then that messes up the flow of working on whatever it is you have at hand. So to be able to write something down and say like, this is not my time to really think about that. I don't want to forget it. Let me write it down. I'll come back to it. Or even put it in your phone or whatever it is that's most efficient for you. That's a way that we can start managing. Sometimes when I work with people who maybe are more anxious or, having that more of an emotional experience or difficulty, again, this is something that feels really unnatural, but helping them plan like, okay, When you wake up in the morning, you'll allow yourself 1 hour to just worry about whatever it is you want. You can be in that space of worry, you can experience it, and then you know that at coming to the end of that hour, we're going to try and transition. It's not to say that the worries will disappear, but we're going to shelf that for a bit and focus in on something else. And so again, I don't want to say that by me saying that means that everyone should do that. I think it's really dependent on the person and a lot of variables. But the reason I'm sharing that is because sometimes we can allow for space for one thing and then more easily be able to move on from it. It's not to say that those feelings or things won't come up, but we can say to ourselves, I can come back to that. I don't need to live in that space right now. And I think in some ways that's an element of, we want to engage with mindful practices and be here and now in whatever it is that we're feeling, but that's not always helpful. So we can allow for spaces and times of the day where we can be mindful, and then other times where we can be more, strategic in what we're doing. So I think it's really difficult for each person. It's going to be different. And I know that's kind of vague, but it's kind of the truth. So you don't have to think about all those thoughts at once. We want to be present in the one thing that we're doing at the time. Again, not good multitaskers. And so to the last point, that's kind of what I was mentioning, that if you have a notepad that you can jot down, just random thoughts that come up that are important, you need to get to, are not in that topic area that you're focusing on right now, having that as something to reference when you're finished of like, okay, wait, what was it that I thought about? It's kind of like when you're sleeping and you wake up and you're like, I'm going to remember this in the morning. And you wake up and you're like, I knew I had to remember something, but I cannot for the life of me remember what it is. So it's kind of similar to that, to be able to, come back to it. All right. So how do we manage and organize our time? So these are some questions that you may ask yourself, just in terms of how good am I, how good am I at time management, or maybe what are things I need to work on. So asking yourself, am I constantly rushing, often late? Do I often cancel enjoyable activities because I'm too busy? Do I feel like there's not enough hours in the day? Do I get frustrated and impatient? Do I have enough time to do the things I enjoy? So I guess let's go back, sorry. So if the answer is yes to these, maybe we want to look at like what we're doing and what are factors that contribute to those difficulties that we're having. My guess is that, a lot of that is tied into time management. So, if you think about defining the term, that is a cluster of behaviors that are deemed to facilitate productivity and alleviate stress. So I know we've been talking about that throughout, but just reiterating that this, again, is a tool. So a person with good time management skills, they can adapt to new problems, readjust as needed to complete an assignment. It's not to say that this person might not feel overwhelmed at any given time. However, it's like, okay, how do we come back to these skills? And how can I engage with this thing in a way that feels less consuming and less overwhelming? So it promotes mindfulness, as you must be present in the task at hand. And that was kind of what I was referencing earlier. Mindfulness can look like different things, right? And so I think oftentimes we think of mindfulness as being in a place of a more state of relaxation, which that can be a type of mindfulness. And for anyone who is highly stressed, yes, 100% recommend mindfulness as a tool for relaxation. I think mindfulness is also the ways that, kind of like what I was saying earlier about riding through things that we do not like. And we can use that as a tool to notice what's coming up for us, but to then refocus into the here and now of what we're doing. So mindfulness has different functions, and I think it can be used for relaxation and it can be used for minimizing stress and anxiety. And it can also be used for helping us really be efficient and effective. Going on a walk, that can be mindful, but we're being fully present. Mindfulness, again, is not something that I don't think any of us are 100% good at. We have so many thoughts. We have so many things going on in our mind and in our body that kind of pull us away from that. And I think mindfulness is the practice of coming back to it. So when you're doing an assignment, again, like I said, those thoughts coming in of things you need to do, okay, that's fine. We'll let those be, write those down, and we come back to it. So that's really a skill that we can utilize in many different regards. That mindfulness does not look like one thing, and it's not used for one thing. And what we know is that research has shown that mindfulness has been really effective with people who present with ADHD, despite being on, without being on medication. Again, not saying that mindfulness is the end all be all without medication. Some people need medication. However, I'm just saying that it is a tool that's been proven to work, and it's something that has been really effective, particularly for people with ADHD. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. Again, reiterating, we want to avoid multitasking as much as we can. Sometimes we do have to be multitasking, but trying to minimize that. Okay. All right. So I think this is a hard part, because you say to someone, all right, so when you're planning, you think about how much time it's going to take you. You kind of allocate a general, sense of how much time you're going to take. And sometimes people are like, well, I have no clue. I don't know how long this is going to take me. And, sometimes people underestimate or are not realistic in terms of the time they're planning for something. So this does require us maybe doing some trial and error, figuring out like the adequate amount of time in order to be able to then plan for it in the future. Again, that might shift or change. And that also might change as you start utilizing different strategies or, things like that. So good time management, it also requires discipline. So you're not always going to feel like you want to do whatever it is you've set out to do, but it's still doing it anyways. Quick thinking. So again, things pop up, unexpected things. And it's making decisions maybe on the fly or in the moment, but it does entail some quick thinking. I think this is a huge one. The third one, knowing how and when to delegate. I think we get these messages of like, whether from our families or like just as a society of like, you need to own your own thing and do your own thing and manage your own. And that's true. And at the same time, I feel like that we have supports in different regards of our life, and they're there for a reason, and it's to help us be our best selves. And sometimes a big part of that is recognizing when it is that we're not able to take something else on. It's kind of thinking of like, even in the field of psychology, right? As a therapist, as a clinician, it's also recognizing our limits of what we know. If I'm working with someone where that's not my area of expertise, am I really being helpful or to their detriment? So it's kind of in the same way of like knowing when is it that I need some support, when is it that I need that assistance or help to get through something or to manage something. Knowing when to use strategies for dealing with procrastination, distraction, and even unplanned events. So obviously for the unplanned events, we don't know when those are coming up. However, we can get to know ourselves in terms of, how do I know when I'm starting to procrastinate? How do I know when I'm starting to feel distracted? Like, what happens in your body? Paying attention to like what you feel like. Are you starting to get more tired? Are you starting to get more jittery? Like, what happens in your body or even in your mind? Do you notice it's harder to concentrate? Do I notice that I'm thinking about something totally irrelevant? Like noticing what happens to you first, so that the goal is that we want to catch it before it gets to the full-on procrastination where you've avoided something for 5 days and it's due tomorrow. So again, that is something that does take sometimes time and a lot of self-awareness. and it's something that you can get support from. I think a lot of these things, I'm saying them like they're easy. They're not, and they take work. And sometimes it might feel, we've functioned in certain ways for our whole life. And if we're wanting to change something, sometimes that takes time, and it's sometimes really hard to even notice what those things are. And so sometimes that can be helpful to have a counselor or a therapist as someone to work with. But it's not, you can also use, just self-help modules as well. But it is something that takes work. Okay, so time, this is a continuation of what we're just talking about. So we want to accurately estimate time and effort required to complete a task. Again, that might take trial and error. We want to identify and organize systems and required resources. So when we say systems, this means like your own system of like how you do things, how you function best and what works best for you. What might work for me might not work for the next person. So it's really getting to know yourself in that way as well. Organize personal time to carry out responsibilities. I see this sometimes, like people make schedules and their things are just back to back. And yeah, we want to be efficient, but we also want to allow for time within that. Like we all have things that we need to do, and that's going to be really important. It's also scheduling social engagements or interactions, time for our relationships, time for, relaxing, watching TV, going out, doing something that's fun for you. Because what we know is that the more that we're like, exerting ourselves, doing other things that don't fill us up, we end up feeling like worn out, tired. And then we start losing the meaning of what we're doing. We want to be able to constantly reconnect to ourselves. And if those things are, again, going back to the goals and the priorities and the values, if those are things that give you life and help you feel reconnected to who you are, that's always a win, because you're coming back to something in a way that is more intentional and also meaningful. I think for me, like one of the worst things is feeling like I'm just kind of going through the motions. You lose that part of us, that our feelings are what make us feel alive and human. And so finding ways to constantly be connected with yourself in that way is really important. So the way that we're planning and organizing, that's going to be a big part of that. Especially when you're in college, it's a really hard time, right, to manage so many different things. I think sometimes things fall on the back burner because, there are so many things that need to get done, which I can totally recognize. And still, I think we can always be improving that. I think it's something that always takes work, and even shifting into the work world, that's a different ballgame. So it's just so many different things that we're constantly, all of us are working on. Some tools are like schedules, timetables with clear specific milestones and deadlines. So again, this refers back to the goal setting and also putting things on paper. We'll talk more. I was going to say you could do it on the computer, but in future sessions, we're also going to be talking more about study skills and the benefits of like handwriting things. Okay. I think this is always important, but especially during this time, like I said, where we're all working in the same place all the time, or if you are going into work, that might be different for you. But for me right now, I'm still working from home. And so routines are key. So developing a routine of your daily responsibilities. Again, I think college is really difficult because it's a time in your life where maybe no 2 days look the same, right? Like how do you have a routine when, days look really different? And yeah, that is a major barrier or struggle to having a routine. I think it's finding small ways in which you can still maintain that, right? So like, for example, maybe you're studying at a different time today or doing work at a different time today than you were yesterday. But we can even think of routines as things like mini rituals that we do, like before we sit down to do work, getting in that headspace. Or when you sit down, that, I always have my tea. So I like my tea beside me. And then I like to have certain things and like kind of preparing myself to know like, okay, I'm getting into work mode. And those can be 5-minute routines where it's like, whatever. So finding ways within the day to maintain like some sense of consistency in terms of how you approach something. So it doesn't mean your day has to look exactly the same each day. That's kind of impossible actually. But you know, also having routines like before bed. So maybe you're going to bed at a different time because you were working, whatever. Well, the goal is to try and get to bed at similar times each night. If you're not able to do that, it's still having routines before bed, getting your body in that state of, you know, knowing I'm going to sleep, doing if you have like a skincare routine, or if you have like, you know, just a bedtime routine, reading, drinking a chamomile tea, I don't know. So kind of getting your body ready. And so we can do those mini routines in different ways, even when our days look really different. The thing about routines is that they help us get into a flow of what comes next. And that's kind of the goal that we want, to help ourselves transition from one thing to the next. Okay, yeah, I think I talked on all these things. All right, so planning and prioritizing. Sometimes, I don't know for you all, but sometimes it's really hard to parse these different things apart, right? Like they feel like they're so intertwined with each other. So if I'm repeating myself at some points, it's because I feel like they're very all interrelated. So again, the to-do lists, these can help us organize ourselves. A big element of that is also organizing according to importance of the activity. So thinking of like chronologically when things are due, the size of the task, how much energy it's going to take, if you need other resources, you know, certain things you maybe can't do at home. So knowing like what time of day or when you're wherever, like I think there are lots of different variables that we're looking at. But in terms of like a physical sense of planning, maybe it's using, you know, arrows, numbers, things to bring your attention. Again, that information processing theory, bringing our attention and having things stand out to us, that we're not taking so much time to like read through the nitty gritty of things, but also having things just stand out and looking at, okay, what is it that I'm trying to achieve? We can prioritize our daily activities into urgent, important, and non-essential. Online too, on Google, you could find like those grids with where they're the different quadrants, where like one is like important and urgent. That one probably needs to get done first. Or important and not urgent. So it's really trying to break down and look at the things that you need to get to, and then how the timeline that you're working within. And I think our phones are really good for that as well, in terms of like reminding you of certain things, or alarms going off at whenever it is you're transitioning to something else. You know, so I think it's also using the things that we have as a benefit. There are lots of different apps, which we'll give some later on, but there are lots of different apps that you can use to help you out. I'm a person who really loves still, I can show you, old school planner, which I like to write, but everyone's different, and sometimes it's really hard to carry that around. So to have that on your phone can also be really helpful. And I think a big thing too is that we want to monitor and adjust those priorities. That, you know, what's important or what's at the top of the priority list this week, that might shift next week based on things that come up between now and then. It's also like revisiting our to-do list. We can rewrite them. We don't have to keep the same one. And so, you know, we want to save trees and we want to be efficient, but also like, I think visually it's really important to pay attention how that impacts you. Again, we want to allow for a margin of unpredictable interruptions and delays. Try not to plan things back to back. Accounting for time that you have to travel to get somewhere. Yes. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to reiterate, planning time for self-care, relaxation, and or social events. So, you know, it's really important to make time for those things. And sometimes if we don't schedule it in, we don't have time for it. And so the goal is that we want to schedule it in. It's important to plan time to process your feelings and mental health, and seek support from friends or professionals. That, you know, it depends on your family. If that's something that you all do together, that's awesome. If not, it's also finding different ways of helping yourself seek that support and being able to process that. Again, you know, we can go on autopilot and go through the motions and do things. However, we're not allowing ourselves to fully be present and feel. And at the same time, sometimes we can't allow ourselves to feel, because if we do, you know, it's impacting our ability to fully engage with a task. So it's allowing for all those different things, maybe not all at the same time, but still finding room to do that. And so lastly, I know we're running out of time, but we made it. Lastly, this is something that is very important to keep in mind, that we can't mistake planning and prioritizing for doing. So even though we've made these lovely to-do lists and lovely schedules, that's one part of the step. Doing it is the next one. And so no matter how good we plan, we have to do it. And so we have to put it into action. And again, I think it's kind of like a muscle. The more we do this, kind of the more like in tune we get with our own process, and the easier it is to follow through. So we hope this was helpful. This might be things that you've maybe already known or tried in different capacities, or maybe today you've taken something different. So if you feel comfortable to do so, we'd love to hear like any feedback or thoughts based on what's come up, if it's things you've already known, and also feedback of what you'd hope to see included maybe next time. But you can send that in through the chat or through talking if you feel comfortable. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure what's happening. Are you getting any comments, Dr. Durham? Oh, you're muted.
I'm asking everybody to unmute themselves so that we can talk. Here we go. I feel like it was interesting and is interesting information. That is one message.
Good. Well, and also if you don't have any questions now, that's also okay. You know where to find us if you do have any follow-up questions or feedback that maybe comes up for you later on. That's totally fine too.
Oh yeah. So I really enjoyed it. I liked how, like, even though it was more specific for people who have ADHD, it wasn't too stressed, because usually when you hear like ADHD, if you don't have it, most people tend to like, oh, that's not for me. But like everyone, like in one way or another, you experience these kinds of things. I really liked how it wasn't like super stressed on ADHD, and it was more like generally oriented. I thought that was really great how you formatted it. That was
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I agree with you. I think even if you don't have ADHD or necessarily those difficulties, I think there are always things that, you know, anyone can be working on and continue to try and you know, just improve on what's going to be the best. So I agree with you. I mean, I think that, I mean, I'm still working on those things. So, you know, like, I think, like I was saying, like different transitions or different things that you're dealing with or having to cope with, changes also what is effective for us. So I don't think it's always like, because this works for me now, it's always going to work. That might change. And so
it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah. So I think I shared in one of the sessions before, but yeah, I'm studying for my licensure exam right now, and I mean, geez, I haven't studied in a long time, and then to now be able to come back to it, like, I'm like, oh my God, I kind of forgot how to do this. So yeah, I think it just changes over time. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I know this was an earlier session than we normally do, but we appreciate you all joining. If you have any questions or anything else that comes up, you can always reach us on email or call into CAPS. Yeah.
Thank you all for your participation. See you for the next session. Bye-bye.
Bye.